Hello everyone, welcome to the fifth iLogic tutorial that I'm making for Catomatic.com. In the previous tutorials we created this bookcase and iLogic rules that control the overall width, height, depth, and number of shelves in the bookcase. Today we're going to add a divider panel that we can set up how many columns of bookshelves we want, or how many columns of shelves we want in the bookcase. We're going to be moving pretty quick, so if it's too fast, go ahead and pause the video or whatever you need to do. But we're going to have to move pretty quickly. The vertical divider that I went ahead and created has notches down below for the base support. Previously I said that we were going to control the base support thickness through the file itself, but we're going to change our minds on that because we're going to that divider panel has to match that thickness. So I've gone ahead and I've created a couple new parameters. I created base thickness and the shelf columns, meaning how many columns of shelves that we want, and that is a unitless parameter. So I'm going to come down to where I'm passing parameters, and I'm going to just simply find my base. I'm going to go to my user parameters there, and I'm going to say my board thickness of that is going to equal this new parameter, base thickness. Alright, so that's done. Now when we're looking at dividing up this shelf, we have to remember that when we put a divider panel in, one panel is going to go in, and so half of the thickness of that panel is going to be on the left side, and half of that thickness of the panel is going to be on the right side. Now on the ends, you're going to have a whole thickness. So to accurately, we want the shelves to all be the same size. So to calculate that equally, what we're going to need to do is calculate from the centers of the side support. So we're going to need to adjust our overall length when we're doing our calculation, so that we subtract a half from each side. So basically one whole thickness will give us our center line overall length. So we'll go in, we'll do that right now. We're going to have shelf spacing. What we're going to do is we're going to say I've got shelf columns. What I need to do is I need to add a parameter, and we're going to say add numeric, and it's going to be column width. Alright, I'm going to leave it at 1 because we're going to calculate that. I'm going to go to my dims rule, and I'm going to say column width equals, and it's going to equal what we got? We got case width minus case wall thickness. Alright, and I'm going to put that in parentheses so that that gets calculated first, and then I'm going to divide that by my column quantity, or my shelf columns, which is at this point is 2. Now I'm going to add a comment, distance between column center lines. Okay, now when I hit OK, go back to our parameters, you can see that my column width is calculated at 24.625, 24 and 5/8. Alright, so we're going to hit done. Now the shelf length, previously the shelf length was calculated inside the dims rule in the shelf. I don't want to do that anymore because I want to do it inside of the assembly. So I'm just going to comment out that rule. Basically I'm leaving it inside the shelf. It will not be used anymore, but if I ever wanted to go back and turn that on, all I have to do is remove that comment, that apostrophe. So now I'll go back to my dims rule, and I'm going to go down to my shelf parameters, and inside the shelf parameters I'm going to find my shelf length, and I'm just going to say that it's going to equal user parameters. I'm going to have my column width, and I have to subtract another thickness because we have to take away a half on each side. So we do that. Now you can see my shelves went down to that width. So now we need to move the shelves over to the other side. So we're going to go here, our shelf parameter, and we're going to find the constraint that holds that in there. So what we need to do is we're going to move the center of the shelf over to the outer edge here, and we're going to move it back into the center of where that shelf's going to need to be. That way, no matter how wide the shelf becomes, the shelf will always be positioned at the left side of the bookcase. So we're going to double click on the constraint. That brings up a long box here that we're going to do. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say, I'm going to put it in parentheses so that it does it first, and I'm going to list parameters, and I'm going to say case width minus, again, I'm going to subtract that case wall thickness, but this time I'm going to divide it by 2 because I'm starting at the halfway point, that origin plane. I'm coming out halfway. So again, I'm going to put this in parentheses so that we now have that on the center line over, actually it would be this way because we're going positive. We're going to have to change it to negative when we're all done so that it goes backwards instead of, that's just the origin directions. So now we got that. Now we're going to subtract column width. We've got our column width, and we're going to divide column width by 2. And like I said, we're going to now put the whole thing in parentheses. And I'm going to put a negative here to make it go negative, because we want it to go to the left. So you can see that this part did go all the way over to the left. Alright, so now we're going to place the divider panel. So now we place the divider panel. We're going to grab our vertical divider. We're going to open it, place it inside, and the first thing I want to do is I want to rename it. And I rename it so that any of the rules that I put on there will never be broken because I changed a part. Now we're going to add some constraints, and I'm going to go to a flush constraint. I want to get a constraint right on there to show where it's going to go that way. So just like the other one, I'm going to do the same type of thing. I'm going to put in case width minus case wall thickness, and divided by 2 minus, and instead of a half of a column width, I'm going to go a full column width. Okay? So if I go to the front view, you'll see that we have got it there. That's exactly where we want it. That puts it right in the center of the center line of that column width. I'll add a couple more flush constraints. We got one for the bottom and one for the bottom of that, and we've got one for the back and another one for the back there. Now you can see that my divider panel is not the correct size, so I need to go and I need to pass the parameters to the divider panel. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a comment that we're going to set divider panel parameters. So I find my vert divider and I go to my user parameters. We have side height, we have base height, we have base thickness, and we also are going to have a case depth, right? Okay, so the side height is going to equal, and I'm going to come up to my user parameters here again. This is going to be case height, and it's going to be minus a case wall thickness. Case depth is going to just be the case depth. Base height is going to be the base height, and the base thickness is going to be that new base thickness parameter I made. I hit OK, and you can see that my divider panel is now in the right place. Okay. Now I'm going to go into we need shelves on this other side of this column, so I'm going to double click on my pattern and I'm going to edit my pattern. I'm going to add a row, and I'm going to add a row to the x-axis, and my column is going to be that's going to be column or shelf columns. So I got 2 there, and my spacing for that is going to be column width. Okay, column width. Now you can see we've got shelves on both sides and we've got a vertical divider. Okay, I'm going to add to my form that we made before. I'm going to edit that form, and now I'm going to bring shelf columns underneath shelf quantity, and I'm going to turn that into a slider just like I did on the the quantity. I'm going to come down, I'm going to say slider properties. I'm going to say 4 is the max. For now, I can change that later if I want, and I'm going to hit OK. Alright, so now when I bring up my config, if I change my shelf columns to 1, you can see that it looks like my divider disappeared, but really what happened is it's on the right end. It's still there. So I need to write a rule that turns that divider panel off, okay, when there's only 1. I'm going to come to my rules, and I'm going to come down here, and I am going to write a rule to do that. So this will be our first if statement, and the if statement goes if, and I'm going to go to my user parameters, and I'm going to say shelf columns, right, equals 1. Then I'm going to say, and I'm going to say components, in my component snippets, is active. I'm going to double click the is active rule, and I'm going to highlight part 1. Now I want vert divider is the one that I want, and I go to the names tab and it gives me the names. I double click on that and it gives me vert divider 1. I could have just typed it in as well, but it's sometimes easier to do that. And now I'm going to say equals false. Okay, so when it's 1, it equals false, but when it isn't 1, I want it on. So I'm going to say else, meaning anytime it's not 1, and then I'm just going to copy this line, and I'm just going to paste it down here, and I'm going to change false to true. All right, and then I'm going to end my end if statement with end if. So basically, this rule says if shelf columns equals 1, then that divider is false. I'm going to suppress it. Else, it's going to equal true, so it's going to be unsuppressed. So when I hit OK, I cannot change because of the level of detail. Now, that's fine. I'm going to hit cancel. The rule gets saved. It doesn't run the rule. Representations, level of detail, it's set to master right now. Whenever it's on master, that means everything's turned on, so that rule won't work. So I have a level of detail that I call iLogic, and it's telling me that I got to save, so I'm going to save, and then it changes over to the iLogic level of detail. That's a custom level of detail. Now when I run my rule, that part suppressed. So now I've got, that on there. So I go to my forms, and when I go back to 2, that divider turns back on. It unsuppresses. I go back to 1, it's suppressed, back to 2. Now if I go to 3, you'll notice that I only have 1. So I need to have a parameter here for that. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create a new pattern. I'm going to click on that part, and I'm going to say column, and I'm going to say x-axis, and this is going to equal shelf columns minus 1. I already had it in there, and the width is going to be column width once again, so that's there. Now when I come down to 2, it'll be 1, and when I come down to 1, it gets suppressed. Alright, so there it is. 2, 3, I can go up to 4. So as you can see, this is working just fine. So that's it for this tutorial. If you have any questions, you can always contact me from Catamatic.com. There's a contact tab there where you can find my email address. Until the next tutorial, I'll see you later.